Okay, just trying things out. Can folks hear me? Stream's being a little funky, so bear with me, folks. Okay, can folks hear me all right? Let me know in the chat. I realize there's just a couple of you right now, but let me know what's going on. Just figuring things out here still, so. Yeah, so I guess I had kind of didn't have a super coherent plan for what I'd do with this stream. I thought I might just keep it pretty casual. Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Can hear me. Is that? Yeah, there we go. Let's switch over to that screen. I figured I would just answer any questions that people had while they're here. I didn't really have much scripted. I just got back from the anti-KKK rally down in my hometown because the Klan had apparently they had wanted to have a rally, and then at the last second they realized that half of Portland comes out whenever fascists show up. So they pissed themselves and didn't even hold their rally, and we had probably a good couple hundred people there. DSA folks, of course the Black Bloc folks. There's a healthy commingling and good, much more solidaristic culture than what you might expect from different left factions. So, Victoria, I hope that answers your question, dear. I figured the other thing I would do on this stream maybe is just kind of share with you guys what I'm reading. I'm reading a lot of different things right now, so main thing, I just got my copy of Monthly Review in the mail. If you don't know, Monthly Review is the oldest continuously published socialist magazine in the I think in the Western Hemisphere, if not just in North America. It's founded in, I think, 1949. Oh, thank you, dear. I thought that's how I thought you pronounce it. I don't speak Polish, but I just followed my Slavic instincts. I was tempted to say Wiktora, but but alas. So this issue is the feature is called Marx and the Indigenous, and it's by John Bellamy Foster, who's of course the editor of Monthly Review right now, Brett Clark, and Hannah Hallman. I haven't gotten to reading yet, but it looks very interesting. It's kind of looks like it is a review of kind of the current literature on Marx and anti-colonial struggle, and I think the things that it's addressing is there's sort of this, I guess, dogmatic rejection of everything Marxist in liberal academia, even in like, you know, anti-colonial stuff, like anti-colonial, I guess, and again, like this is not my area of academia at all, but like my impression is that, yeah, Brianna, I'll give you the um, the login, the monthly review link. Let me just. Um, so let's see. I think what I was saying, I was talking about the monthly review article. I think there's my impression that I get from what I've seen from and heard from folks in kind of liberal left academia is that some of the anti-colonial literature is very like knee-jerk anti-Marx. The whole discourse of, Marx was a white man and Marxism is Western chauvinist, blah, blah, blah. And, obviously that erases all of the indigenous struggles that have, been either influenced by or commingled with or whatever with Marxism. And, that all kinds of anti-colonial theory has been influenced by, or it takes directly from Marxist theory. But I mean, this article also, again, I'm just kind of skimming through it here, seems to acknowledge that there has historically been, at least in kind of the Western imperial powers, the kind of the Marxism has been less sensitive than it ought to be to indigenous struggles. So I think that's important to address too. So this coming at this dialectically rather than just kind of saying, well, Marxism is right and there's no need to update it. Victoria says, Karl Marx is really devalued here. Yes, that's very relevant here. Okay, what else am I reading? I've got my reading is pretty wide. For folks who are maybe joining us for the first time, I'll fully admit that my scholarship is not grounded in like lefty academia. Like I don't. My degree is in physics, and I just kind of like pick up books that I think are interesting looking and read them. And that's I mean, I didn't radicalize by like reading a bunch of Lenin. But incidentally I radicalized and then I read Marx and Lenin and so on, and it has continued to inform my the way I think about the world and whatnot. So this other book that I'm reading is from, I believe, a South African scholar named James Ferner, and it's called Marx on Capitalism, the Interaction Recognition Antinomy Thesis. And I am about 10 pages in. I just started this morning. And he is, I'll be frank, this book is a bit out of my reach. It's a very deep dive on commodity form philosophy, and yeah, I'm not going to pretend that I'm looking at this table of contents here. I'm not going to pretend that I know what I'm really looking at here. It's a lot to unpack, and but yeah, I just started that this morning, and it's pretty interesting. Also have here The Accumulation of Capital by Rosa Luxemburg, which is I learned about this book actually through Revolutionary Left Radio. They were talking about, they actually had a special episode where they just talked about Rosa Luxemburg's economic thought, because she was a revolutionary, of course, but oh, bienvenido, Javi. Welcome. Um, ¿Cómo estás, compa? So, just talking about some books I've got around reading, and other things that I'm working on. Let's see. In the things that are a little closer to home, uh, on my end, things that aren't a bunch of leftist theory and history, I've got this lovely little book called Partial Differential Equations for Scientists and Engineers, which is really great. It's so for those unfamiliar, differential equations are like a branch of mathematics that deal with basically systems that change over time. So like, if you have like a sheet of metal and you want to model, and you apply heat to it, and you want to model how the heat distribution on the sheet of metal transforms over time, you need a set of differential equations um, to unpack that. And I'm not going to get into the mathematics of that here, because I'm working with I don't have a great way to project that on the screen here, and I want to keep things pretty focused, I guess, on this channel rather than. But I mean, I share a little bit of myself on here. So, and this is also to kind of make up for the fact that my undergrad in physics did not really cover this this topic very deeply. We got kind of introduced to it in our electricity and magnetism class, but wasn't terribly covered. It wasn't covered very well. It was covered pretty superficially and just kind of like, oh, this is all you need to know to do these basic undergrad problems. Now, good luck, kids. What else do I have here? I have got another book called Red Hamlet, The Life and Ideas of Alexander Bogdanov. So, for folks who don't know, Alexander Bogdanov was a member of the Bolshevik Party. He was frequently got into sparring matches with Lenin, as as many people did. But I think another thing that people don't realize is that there was, the especially kind of in the earlier stages, the Bolsheviks were not super unified. Like they were a party of revolutionaries like any other in that regard. Like they had debates over issues, and they didn't always agree on things, and they needed to hash things out, and sometimes they had really fierce debates over things. And Bogdanov had quite a few spats with Lenin, and Lenin wrote a book, a philosophical book called, I think, Materialism and Empirio-Criticism, if I recall correctly. That was what the book was called, which was one part philosophy and one part polemic against Bogdanov. So this book, I'm not too far into it either, but it talks a bit about Bogdanov's early life, and he came from actually a pretty similar background as Lenin. His family were kind of middle class, not like not nobles or anything, but um, fairly comfortable, and they weren't strapped for anything, and so he had a very high quality education, and um, I'm finding a certain kindred spirit in him, because he was also a mathematician and a physicist, or I think let me see, he was definitely a mathematician. I read that. He's just a tremendous thinker, despite what ultimately his politics were. He's still just a really interesting guy. What else do I have lying around that I'm working on here, folks? Just wanted to say hello to all the folks. I've got 7 people joining us. Make sure to ask me any questions you have for the channel in the chat. I'm friendly, I promise. Let's see. I've got my good old trusty copy of Capital here, which I am rereading for the umpteenth time. I am on chapter 7. No, chapter 8? Chapter 7. Farah Mars says hello from Florida. Well, hello right back to Florida. Welcome. Almost finished here. I have Chris Harmon's A People's History of the World, which is oh, hello to Georgia. Hello. Georgia the state, or Georgia as in the country? I don't know. So this book, People's History of the World, is really fantastic. I'll spare Harmon for his Trotskyite errors, but for the most part, this book is very well put together. It goes all the way from kind of prehistorical societies and the Neolithic era, and really covers a lot of ground. It's not terribly deep history, but if you've never, if you're like me and you have kind of a more STEM education, a more sciencey based education, it's a good kind of crash course, and it is very accessible. It's big. It's a big book. I think it's about 620 pages, but it is not heavy reading. It is the kind of thing that, you can read a chapter with your breakfast. It's very digestible, pun intended. And then finally, I've got here. Oh, finally, I've always got more books. I've got Pyotr Kropotkin's Modern Science and Anarchy. I'm a Marxist-Leninist, but I believe in intellectual, exploration. So I read plenty of anarchist stuff too, and I don't think it's all bad. Some of it's very smart stuff that I can appreciate its contribution to communist struggle and theory, and uh, think about things in a much more kind of holistic way, right? There's not just kind of one thing over here and one thing over there, you know. There are, of course, certain intractable contradictions between the different camps, but you know that doesn't mean we have nothing to learn from each other. Uh, Anthony says the state, so lots of heat bugs and no indoor running track. Uh-oh. Yikes. Yeah, I'm up here in the Pacific Northwest, which today was kind of cool. It was I was out at the anti-fascist rally earlier, and I had the terrible foresight not to bring gloves. I was wearing pretty light clothing, and I was surprisingly warm, except for my um, except for my hands. My fingers were freezing, and anyway. Vegan Egoist says, I really liked the book recommendation, The Theoretical Minimum. As a molecular biologist student, it was an easy refresher. Do you have something similar but for algebra? Yes, I do. So first of all, I would suggest, okay, so algebra for one thing is a huge field, but for a very accessible introduction, I would suggest the YouTube channel Three Blue One Brown. It's run by Grant Sanderson. He has a series called The Essence of Linear Algebra, which is usually where people start when they are looking at, um, you know, uh, kind of beginning algebra. I'm going to see if I can pull up the playlist so I can send it over to you guys, because I am all about sharing that beautiful, beautiful mathematics with everyone. I think it's an important part of, just sharing human knowledge. It's a good thing. So I just sent a link in the chat. It's that'll get you a really good primer on the field of linear algebra. For books, I'd say, gosh, I'm just gonna probably recommend what I learned in my undergrad. Let's see. For a beginner book, I would say an intro. Oh gosh, it's got such a generic title. I'm gonna just look it up now. It's called Linear Algebra and Its Applications by David Lay, and I think his brother or his son. I'm not sure. I'm gonna just send a link to the. So that's that Pearson link is for the Linear Algebra and Its Applications by David Lay. It's pretty. I mean, it's pretty elementary. Oh, Farah. Sorry, I don't know. For mispronouncing your name, I'm sorry, but Farah, I studied. I got my degree is in physics, and I have a second bachelor's in mathematical economics, and I minored in math. So really, kind of this lefty stuff is new for me. It's I try to be humble here, because really all I'm doing is reading this stuff like Marx and Lenin and whatnot, and sharing what I learned from reading. I'm not any kind of uh, I'm not any kind of like professor of Marxist philosophy or anything like that, and I don't pretend to be such. I'm a curious person who goes and learns things that look interesting to me and that I think are relevant for modern struggle. Um, let's see. Anthony asks, "Do I have a favorite political theorist?" Um, and have I heard of Anarcho-Pac? Yeah, I really like Anarcho-Pac. I frequently disagree with her, obviously, because I'm a Marxist-Leninist and she's an anarchist, but I think she actually has some really great videos on Marx. And, if you want to understand anarchism and really like, from somebody who's very deep on theory, I would seriously, yeah, her channel's great, and I don't have any. I have nothing but respect for her. She's really great. I just, obviously my differences are probably more sectarian than anything else, so I tend to kind of downplay that in my public facing here because I think the internet is a really dreadful medium for expressing that kind of thing, and especially on these lefty Twitter and lefty YouTube channels, it's like I mean, for one thing, I would be terribly out of place in terms of like arguing somebody on like theory, I guess, because I'm not any kind of expert at all. And frankly, I'm pretty dreadful at debating. Um, but also, it's because I just think it fosters this very kind of competitive norm, and I don't want to feed into that, because that's totally antithetical to what I think it means to be a communist. Like, I think that, theoretical struggle does matter, but like, it matters in the real world. It doesn't matter like in on the internet. There's this great old saying that I remember. I think I learned it from my dad or something, but it's on the internet, nobody knows that you're actually a dog. Um, which is to say, like, I am not going to spend my time arguing on like Twitter or Facebook or whatever with some like self-described anarchist or whoever or Maoist or whoever who's going to just like call me a revisionist, call me a tanky or whatever. I just like I'm so done with that. Like it's not helpful, and like frankly, I have my friends in real life are anarchists and are Maoists and are like even Demsocs and left liberals and that kind of thing. So um, yeah, Anthony, I don't. It's not so much that I believe in left unity because I think that that's kind of I think it's a very abstract notion. I think there's a very specific term called the United Front, which is has a very specific historical meaning for one thing, but it's basically that the United Front, like for example, like today in Portland, the KKK was going to show up and rally, so there's a united front of everyone from anarchists to Demsocs and liberals, and all these people show up to, just say, hey, fuck the KKK, like that's, I guess if you want to call that left unity, but I don't think that's really, I really don't think that's the right word for it because we're not united around like any specific program other than like, in this case, like, hey, fuck the Klan and fuck cops. Like, if we're agreed on that and we are like all on board and like sharing our tactics and our vision for this specific action together, I think that that's a lot more concrete than just like, oh hey man, can we all just get along, like, oh we're all leftists. Like, no, I think that's again, that's far too abstract, and that struggle is the thing that really shapes this, and that like whatever name tag you put on yourself, hello, I'm Melody and I'm a Marxist Leninist, like I think that that matters a lot less in person. um yeah, so I hope that kind of answers that. But I started answering a question about whether I had a favorite political theorist, and then I got sidetracked talking about other things. Um, let's see. Okay, so I'm going to talk about political theorists that maybe I don't necessarily agree with them, but I've learned a lot from them. One is the Marxist philosopher Moishe Postone. He died, I think, 2 years ago, back in 2018. He wrote a very famous and very difficult book called Time, Labor, and Social Domination, which is basically like a rethinking of Marxist theory based on a very kind of particular sort of reading of Marx's kind of midlife work, like the Grundrisse and kind of that stuff that he came up with in the kind of late 1850s. Um, so it's like, again, I have to disclaim here that I won't claim that I understand everything that I read in it because it's a very difficult book, and I feel like some of these Marxist philosophers. I think this is maybe just a problem of philosophical academia in general. Is that you know these professors publish these books just to give their grad students a headache or something. I mean that's maybe a bit dismissive because this book is tremendous, but sometimes I would just finish reading a chapter and just be like, oh gosh, this is so dense. I have to think about this for the next 2 days. But it has in it what I thought was really interesting is kind of a dissection of time, specifically like this notion of abstract time. So, meaning like the fact that we in capitalist society divide up time into these neat little units of like days, hours, minutes, seconds, etc. Like human human beings have not always done that. Like time exists in this very in under capitalism. This is Postone's case. He argues that time as it's conceived of in capitalist society is very like uh, it's very historically specific in the way that it's conceived of, and it's kind of, and of course like the time's linearity and that kind of thing. Um, but yeah, I'll be honest with you. This book is very difficult, and it's interesting, and like I said, as far as political thinkers that have influenced me, like this is definitely like an interesting thing that sent me down a lot of different rabbit holes. Um, yeah, time is a human made concept, but it's got its uses, right? And I mean, like I think about this a lot as a physicist. I think about a lot about how much we really don't understand about time and like space time, right? Because as Einstein discovered, time and space are totally inseparable, right? And I mean, like I think we kind of have an intuitive sense of this in our day-to-day lives, right? Like you never say to somebody like, "Oh, meet me at the water fountain." Like that doesn't make any sense. You have to say, "Meet me at the water fountain around 2," or something like that. Like you never associate like time. You never associate time without space, and you never associate space without time. And I think most people have kind of an intuitive sense about that, even if they're not thinking of it in terms of like, you know, physics. It's just kind of like it's uh, so part of the fabric of our day to day lives that it's I guess that's the thing is I think that time is not purely man made, but I think the way that we conceive of time is very specific to human beings. I think um, that's maybe what folks tend to argue about more. Anyway, so rambled on long enough about that. Um, I guess I can talk for a minute about what I'm planning on doing with this channel. Um, so, folks who've been joining us lately, I have been doing a live stream series on The German Revolution by Pierre Brouet, which is a massive book. I can pull it up here on my computer actually because I have ebook of it, and I'll show it off a little bit. I'll show the oh, excuse me. I have the table of contents here. So we have so far in our live stream study series, which I'm collaborating with the YouTubers Labor Kyle, Izzy Does Everything, and Young Simba. We are not like an official group or anything. We're just four good friends who like to collaborate on this project together, where we just read a selection from this book and then talk about it on live stream. So far we have covered in the 2 streams that we've done so far. In the first stream we covered everything up to chapter 2, which covers, as you can see on my screen here, hopefully you can read it, I'll zoom in a little bit. So we covered the first 2 chapters in the first stream, and then in the stream that we did last weekend, we did chapters 3 through 6. So we talked about the first one here, the first chapter, chapter 3, the lefts in German social democracy, and how they were influenced a lot by the Dutch left thinkers like Anton Pannekoek and his intellectual circles. And then we talked about the betrayal in chapter 4, the betrayal of socialist values by the leadership of the Social Democratic Party and their support for the German entry into World War I. And then in chapter 5, we talked about how that led to a split in the SPD, where the folks who were kind of wanting to break from that conservatism founded an independent Social Democratic Party. And of course, that included folks, we haven't gotten here yet, but that would include folks like Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, who would later form the KPD, the Communist Party of Germany. And I guess that kind of ties into what chapter 6 is all about. And so if you're curious about that, yeah, go check out those streams, and they're on my channel, they're archived. Yeah. What else? I have been working on scripts for my series on the history of the Democratic Party, which is, I realize I started that a while ago, but I can't do this for a living. I do have a day job, so my ability to come on here and put out content is limited. So I'm doing my best, I swear. Hopefully have the second part of that series out sometime in the next couple weeks. I have the audio recorded for it. I just need to put together a good little slideshow and then all that kind of stuff. But, it's going to depend on how much time I can take away from my, my day job and my other things that activism and other things that I do to take care of that. Ferramar says, have I thought about what it would take to end capitalism? Yeah, I think about that a lot. I would not say that I have all the answers. I think about a lot of different things. I think that's part of the point, is not to say that, we have a ready-made solution to okay, first we're gonna, overthrow the bourgeoisie and smash the state, and then we're going to reestablish a workers and peasants controlled blah blah blah. No, you can't just transhistorically try to copy what old revolutions did. We can always look to them as kind of not like blueprints so much, but as kind of jumping off points, I guess, and look at the things that they did that were that are worth, seeing how we can recontextualize them in the modern day, and some things that they did that were maybe a little backwards and maybe not, not worth repeating. That's why I really encourage folks to study the history of previous revolutions, specifically of anti-capitalist revolutions, Russian Revolution, Chinese Revolution, Cuban Revolution. There's many, many, many revolutions that are worth studying. Um, and of course, the German Revolution, because the German Revolution was defeated, and it led to the defeat of it. I mean, like, I'm speaking in very broad terms here, but the German Revolution, its death led, I would say, to the rise of Nazism in Germany in no small part. Um, you know, so studies, I'm sorry if Farah Mars, if you're not satisfied with that answer, because it's a bit of a non-answer, I'll admit. But you know, uh, I think I guess the answer from me is I think a lot about what it would take to end capitalism, and I don't have any really great answers. I think a lot of people are also doing that, and I hope that they get together and talk more, because that's what we need. I'm not saying that that in and of itself would be good enough, but it's something. Um, and other things I have planned for the channel. Labor Kyle and I are also working together on doing a book review of a book called When Workers Shot Back by Robert Ovetz, which is all about the violent period of class struggle from 1877 to 1921 in the United States, which had some of the most bloody periods of struggle in U.S. history that frequently just get kind of swept under the rug. We talk about if you have a U.S. education, we talk about we talk about the Civil War, and maybe talk a little bit about Reconstruction and the Gilded Age at the end of the 19th century, but very few, I'd say, high school or even college level things in the U.S. talk about that. Oh, oh, hello, radical reviewer. Welcome, welcome. Um, yeah. Well, don't worry about not being able to watch, because I don't have anything other than just a little image that I made on screen. But thank you so much, everyone. Make sure to go check out Radical Reviewer's channel. He's a good boy. Give him a treat. Uh, and check out the video that he and I did together. We did a book review of Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific by Friedrich Engels, and I would say if there's another video on his channel that I would really highly recommend to everyone, is How Nonviolence Protects the State, which I believe he did a collaboration with Aaron from Reeducation on that book, which is a really great book, and I hope that more people read it. I have my issues with it as a Marxist, but I don't want to get into that here. I think that it's the good thing that it does is maybe for the more liberal kind of readers is to understand that um, that not that this dogmatic commitment to nonviolence is not going to be able to ultimately confront fascists and the state and so on, and that the state is our enemy. Um, yeah, yeah, Rads, you do great work, and I really appreciate it. Like, I have to actually, since you're here, I just wanted to shout out, like, your channel is partially what inspired me to start mine. I don't think I'd be able to put my feet forward here without having seen what you do, and of course, without I felt very privileged to contribute to your channel, to do that review with you. It was a real honor. Um, Anyway, so everyone go go give Rads a treat, go subscribe to his channel. um, Rad says, I'm working on a review for A New Liberty by Murray Rothbard. Yeah, Rothbard, for those who are unfamiliar, Murray Rothbard is the granddaddy of so-called anarcho-capitalism, which is, as we all know, a bunch of bullshit. It has nothing to do with actual anarchism. Like, again, like, I'm not an anarchist, and I will defend anarchism from anarcho-capitalists who think that it's theirs. Um, let's see. Uh, I guess since more folks have trickled in here, folks, if you're curious about what I'm doing with this channel, feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and I'll try my best to answer them. I guess I can talk about some of the other books that are on my shelf, some that I have not read yet, some that I have read parts of. I'm that kind of person. I jump between books. Um, Somebody asked me earlier, political theorists have influenced my thinking, and I'd say the first and foremost is Lenin, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, the great Russian revolutionary, and I would say some of the best books I have that are either by him or about him. So I have on my shelf here, I have What Is to Be Done, which is his 1901/1902 book on kind of the strategy and tactics of the Bolshevik Party in that period. There's a lot of really interesting, like, I'm going to get really niche and nerdy here for a second, but there's a lot of really interesting literature on this book because it is so, like, if you've ever read it, it's very specific to the things that were happening in those years. Like, the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, which would later become the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks, was, I yes, like, they had just formed in 1898, so they were just a couple years old. Um, and so the tactics and strategy and whatnot that they were adopting in this period, where, for one thing, they were an illegal party, so they had to do everything, off the books, underground, which I think a lot of people don't even, who study this stuff on maybe even just a cursory level, don't realize, like, socialism, like, socialist parties and unions were illegal, and I think, like, a lot of people don't realize that, or don't appreciate just, like, how dangerous what they were doing was in their context. And I think there's a kind of a tendency to forget about that. But what else do I have here? I have, of course, The State and Revolution, just, great primer on how Marxists think about the capitalist state. There is Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, which fucking every person, everyone should read, but everyone especially if you live in the imperial, the Eurosphere, as I call it, the US and Europe, and um, that sort of thing. I think it should be required reading. Like, I'm not somebody. I try not to be ableist about this reading stuff, because I realize, like, not everyone has, like, the time to read, and not everyone has the, like, ability to read, and I don't want to kind of impose that without, just being sensitive to that. But uh like, this book is short, and it's just a great primer on how, the capitalist, big rich capitalist European and US countries, like, how they screw with the third world, and how their wealth is, they have to continuously expand their markets into further corners of the earth, and this leads to all kinds of contradictions, like war and whatnot. Let's see. Oh, Rad says, what are my thoughts on Michael Parenti? I really liked him a lot when I was first getting radicalized, but to be honest, as I've gotten older, I see Parenti more as a Michael Moore pop theorist in my mind. Um, yeah, I haven't read a whole lot of Parenti, so I feel a little out of place making judgment on that. I've seen some of his lectures and that kind of thing. I think he's definitely a good place to start. I think uh, my personal preference for especially like talking about like the Soviet Union is E.H. Carr, because he's just he's just definitive on that. Um, so yeah, sorry, Rads, that's probably not a very uh, not a great answer, but Parenti, I would I think he's a good. I'd say maybe he's a little bit more radical than Chomsky, but I still think he has. There's a lot of problems that I have with some of these people, which is just kind of more to do with the conservatizing uh, influence that being in academia will have on your writing, just in principle. But yeah, again, I feel iffy about commenting on Parenti, not just having not really read a whole lot of his stuff. I've read The Face of Imperialism, which is pretty good. Or is that what it's called? Face of Imperialism? There's also a book by John Bellamy Foster. There's two very similarly titled books. One is Naked Imperialism. The other is The Face of Imperialism. I can't remember who wrote which one, but anyway. Let's see. Anthony Ruiz says, I was wondering what your opinion is of the idea of a union in the military. With the spreading popularity of socialism in the U.S., perhaps radical soldiers could come. Ooh, yeah, I have real, uh, oof, yeah, I don't know. I have a lot of mixed feelings about how to approach the issue of military in the US, because on the one hand, like uh, um, we want to bring over as many like people to our side as possible, especially people who are, who can wield are competent with weapons and whatnot. But at the same time, like there are some pretty major concerns there, like the fact that in this period the U.S. military is almost all volunteer, and there's some political problems that come with that. And again, it's not to say all the soldiers are like conservative right wing assholes, but like there are again like I've met plenty of folks who are like they signed up when they were 18, and they got caught up in all the post 9/11 nationalism and stuff, and they really didn't understand, and I have some I can empathize on some level there, but I just yeah, I don't have, again, here, folks, I don't have really great answers for a lot of these questions. I'm sorry. Maybe somebody who's a little bit more familiar with the U.S. military can comment on that, because that I'm really not the right person to ask. Rad says, "Oh yeah, you've reviewed both." Yeah, I've really realized that. Um, I think that's maybe where I think I heard about Parenti's book through you, Rads, and then I got an ebook of it for myself and read it. It's pretty short. It's like less than 200 pages. Something. It's very, very digestible. Victor says, just remember that Parenti criticized Bernie Sanders and cut that friendship off when Bernie Sanders promoted U.S. American imperialism towards Yugoslavia. Yeah, yeah. That's an issue that I have with Sanders, for one thing. It's not simply like, oh, he did this one thing and so he's canceled or whatever. It's more just like, what's his, like I really see a lot of folks are putting a lot of faith in the idea of Bernie Sanders, and I don't. I'm not somebody who will wag my finger and tell you like, if you support Bernie, you're a counter-revolutionary, blah blah blah. I'm not one of those people, but like I am trenchantly, critical of uh, this notion that like, okay, we're gonna elect a bunch of center left soc dem politicians, and that's just gonna like that's like the next great hope for the U.S. working class somehow. Like I don't buy it. Like this is something that Eric Blanc has argued for a lot in Jacobin, and while I have a lot of respect for Blanc, he's great labor journalist, and I have his book on the 2018 teachers strike wave. But just like this line that I think Jacobin likes to toe a lot is just very conservative and very like, frankly, I call it, the and I hear it often from people who gas on about capitalist realism a lot, which is, I mean, the irony for me is that capitalist realism, like Bernie Sanders is part of, and that whole mode of thinking is part of capitalist realism. It's this kind of like boxed in notion that like, oh yeah, well he's the best we can do and blah blah blah. It's the same, and I think of recuperation as well. Like I think that it would be one thing like if we had like a mass workers party in the US or something, and we were like already had like an anti-capitalist movement that would that could hold anyone who we elected to account. But like we can't do that with people like Bernie Sanders and that sort of those sort of people who are like self-declared democratic socialists running in the Democratic Party, because this institution is not accountable to us. It's not, as we're seeing from the fuckery that's going on in Iowa right now. It's a completely undemocratic and unaccountable institution that, like, you know, um, we can't. We can't infiltrate it. It's a system. It's a capitalist party, and it's been systematically designed to keep us out. And I think that if we have any sense, we should respect that. Um, Oh, Brianna, thank you for coming on. Really appreciate. Brianna is I think one of my latest people to become a patron on my Patreon, which is a real great way to support my channel if you can. So if you can, even if you can only contribute like as little as $1 a month, it's still really helpful for me. So head over to patreon.com/a world to win to support me. Um, and Javi says, for me, it's terrifying of thinking of living without socialized healthcare, and it's something that's normalized in the U.S. This campaign. Oh, okay. I see. Yeah, I mean, the U.S. has really never had socialized medicine at all. Um, and like one in the research that I was doing for my video on my next video that's on kind of the early 20th century Democratic Party, which is that with the New Deal and the Social Security Act, like the US was actually the last of the big capitalist countries to adopt some kind of like, public retirement program like that. So it was pretty bare bones, and it was, of course, being the time that it was created in. Oh, excuse me for just a moment, folks, here. All right, I'm back, folks. Pardon the interruption. Victor says, can someone... yeah. uh, yeah, hey, can maybe let's not get me deplatformed here by talking about that kind of thing. Um, uh, sorry, Victor, I know you and I share a lot of feelings on this, but I think we should be careful here. Uh, let's see. Yeah, Pete, I think who was it? It was Leon Thomas, the channel Renegade Cut did a really great video talking about what a piece of ass that piece of excuse me, not piece of ass, piece of shit that Pete Buttigieg is. Um, and as my comrade Labor Kyle pointed out, um, his father, I can't remember his name. I think it starts with a J. Um, his father apparently was like a Marxist scholar on on the works of Antonio Gramsci, which is interesting, of how far the apple fell from the tree. I think the same is actually true of Kamala Harris's father. Um, yeah, he's also like a renowned scholar of some radical theory. Um, oh, let's see. Uh, Other things that I'm reading. There are two books that I would like to recommend to folks for Black History Month here in the US and elsewhere, which is Asada, an autobiography, which is, of course, the autobiography of Asada Shakur, one of the great women of the Black Panthers. I have started reading that book, and it is just incredible. Uh, it's disturbing, frankly, but like in a way that like it kind of needs to be. Anyhow, um, and then also I would recommend Paul Ortiz, his book, An African American and Latinx History of the United States, which is, I think, from Beacon Press. Let me check. Let me it's over my bookshelf just a sec. Yeah, Beacon Press 2018? Yeah, 2018. Go check. I'm checking. Oh, and I learned just from opening the inner flap here that there are two other books that I didn't even know about that are related. One is a Queer History of the United States by Michael Bronsky, and A Disability History of the United States by Kimmy Nielsen. I did not know about that. So, yeah. And of course, it mentions another book that I have, which is An Indigenous People's History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. She's a real incredible writer. She Radical Reviewer, who was on here earlier, did a review of her book called Loaded, which is, I think the subtitle is something like A Disarming History of the Second Amendment, which is, the Second Amendment, which I think a lot of people mistakenly associate with the kind of standard nationalist narrative around the Second Amendment is, it was all about just man's intrinsic right to keep and bear arms, and we need guns so that we can overthrow government if it becomes tyrannical. Well, the reality, of course, is that it was all about exterminating natives and giving all the white people guns, so all this settlers guns, so they could you know, kill indigenous people, which is like, you know, when you put it that way, it sounds a lot less appealing. um, so, but yeah, it's a that's not a book I've read. I've heard Rad's Radical Reviewer's review of it, but it's one that I highly recommend to anybody. I can't be on this stream without talking about a book that I cite every 2 seconds in my series on the history of the Democratic Party, which is called The Democrats: A Critical History by Lance Selfa. Haymarket Books, 2012. So it's a little dated, but it's still pretty relevant. And if you just like, if you really like, I think if you have, if you or you know someone who has any kind of illusions about the Democratic Party and why it is called the graveyard of social movements, this is a great place to start. Um, anyway, I can say a lot of good things about this book. It's short and sweet. We've got it says many sad things of Bernie. He'll be good for a checkpoint for all our agendas. However, we'll have to reverse Rosa him later down the road. Oh my gosh, I don't want to think about that. Um, you know, I guess the conversation I keep having is, you know, if the U.S. Sponsors a coup every time somebody democratically elects a leftist politician into office in other countries, what's it going to do when the U.S. does it to itself? Like, you know, that's a really chilling thing to think about. Like, you know, ugh. I mean, like my, you know, it's maybe this is, you know, it's a little too speculative, but I like to think of, you know, if on the incredibly slim chance that Bernie Sanders is elected president, which again, I have to emphasize, I do not think it's going to happen. But in the event that it does, like, I honestly see it being, uh, in many ways, and kind of a repeat of the like a just like a more intense repeat of the Obama years. Like everyone on the right called Obama a communist, a socialist, blah 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 for all 8 years that he was in office. And of course, we all know he was like a neoliberal, right? And he like bailed out the bank. Well, yeah. Um, you know, kept us in the wars and expanded the drone program and expanded ICE and deported more immigrants than any previous president. So some communist progressive champion he turned out to be, right? But you know, with Sanders, I think it's going to be kind of similar caliber. You know, like I think the Senate will remain fairly conservative. I think that there aren't, frankly, like the progressive element within the Democrats in the House of Representatives is frankly does not have the kind of clout that they would need on Capitol Hill to really be able to push forward any kind of meaningful legislation like Medicare for all. Like I just again like I don't say this to just be a downer, a pessimist. I just like you know I'm somebody you know can maybe tell me I'm wrong here, but that's what I see that you know the system is designed to kick leftists out of it, even if it's the most milquetoast center left social democratic stuff like Bernie Sanders. Like you know Medicare for all, it would be a big you know welcome change, but you know it's you know this the government in the last decade, the most milquetoast reform, this the Affordable Care Act was like has been you know was opposed as you know communism since day one, and everyone hates it anyway because of course what it does is hands the keys to the insurance companies, and you know that they fundamentally you know profited off of it. um, but yeah, like yeah, and like again, I want to emphasize with folks like I'm not here to scold you. I'm not here to scold anybody and be like, if you vote for Bernie, you're a social fascist or whatever. Like that's just ridiculous nonsense, and I don't think it helps convince anybody of anything. Um, so yeah, like oh, Eve Coley's here. Thank you for showing up. I appreciate it. Um, if we're just kind of talking about books that I'm reading, and folks are dropping their questions in the chat, and I'm answering them. I'll be able to be here for another 20 minutes or so. I don't want this stream to go on too much longer, but yeah, just talking about books I've been reading lately, kind of the things I want to do with my channel. And you, as my viewers, I want to know what kind of content you're interested in, what kind of stuff that you'd like to see. So I can't promise that I'll deliver on all of it, but I'll if there's stuff that a lot of people are really itching to see, I'll try to make it happen. So um, yeah, feel free to say that in the chat or to send me a DM on Twitter or whatever. Yeah. Um, Victoria says, wish the Black Panther Party didn't get compromised by COINTELPRO. Yeah, uh, a pox on the house of Steve Aoki for being a snitch. uh, I don't know. Folks don't know the story of Steve Aoki. He was a member, I believe, of the Black Panther Party, and unless I've got this all backwards. So I'm trying to recall this stuff off the top of my head, so bear with me here. But you know, uh, Steve Aoki was a member of the Black Panther Party, and he turned out to be an informant the whole time. He was in it for many, many years, and uh, turned out to be a snitch. So, yeah. Um, be careful. That's the other thing. Is I think to an extent, like having our movements infiltrated is like kind of an inevitable hang up. Like, I mean, it's an inevitable part of revolutionary struggle. Like, I think that's just, I think we have to accept that that's part of the game. Like, this is what the Bolsheviks dealt with during their time, and this is what many other revolutionaries have dealt with is infiltrators and attempts to derail or co-opt a movement or whatever. It's part of the game. We have to take it into our calculations. It doesn't mean we should be we should just say, oh well, we're going to get infiltrated, so why try? It's like, no, we have to operate in a way that like accounts for the fact that we could have potentially, we could have infiltrators, but that's like the importance of building a movement that has mass support, because that, I think, and at least this is my kind of opinion at this point, is that I think that that is what gives legitimacy and agency to a revolutionary movement, is mass support. And if infiltrators are trying to kind of sabotage from the inside, it'll be um, you know it'll be a lot harder to do if there's a big mass movement, and like those people are marginalized, right? And then Victor also brings up the importance of the shittiness of snitch jacketing. So yeah, like it's the kind of thing where you really, yeah, you don't want to make those kind of claims without receipts, right? Like you don't want to just go around saying, "Oh, so and so is a Fed," or blah blah blah, without like real concrete evidence, right? And because you can get into, I've seen this happen in real life. It can get real ugly, with people being like, "Oh, so and so is paid by the cops or paid by the FBI or whatever," and so sometimes it turns out to be true, but you have to handle this thing very carefully, right? It's very easy let it get out of hand and to let just make careless moves, right? So it's something that I think you have to handle very delicately. And so it's like, just not to say it's not a problem. It can be a very serious problem, but you know, anyhow, that's all I'll say about that. Um, anyhow, maybe I'm running out of things to talk about, so I might try to wrap up pretty soon. So if you guys, I say there's about 8 of you watching right now. If you have questions, please, drop them in the chat. If there's other topics you want me to just kind of ramble about, I can do that too. Or I can read out of one of the books that I was talking about earlier. I'm going to be here for maybe another 10, 15 minutes or so, unless you guys are getting bored of me, in which case I'll probably just wrap things up sooner rather than later. Eve says, what are the limits of studying whistleblowers regarding to how to deal with infiltration? Oh, yeah. Again, you guys are asking like a lot of really good questions, and ones that like I really wish I was more qualified to answer, because I do not know. Like, I'm just gonna say that right out the gate. These things are, this is the importance of building, deep and lasting relationships in our movements with each other. So yeah, it's gonna take it. That's what it takes, frankly, and like that doesn't solve the problem. Excuse me. That doesn't solve the problem as such, but it definitely, it can, if you are more deeply in tune to your community, especially your community of like activists, it's a lot, because at that, I think a lot of people get lost in kind of maybe the social media thing of like, it really, like it's this kind of lack of solidarity, right? Like, oh, you can call anyone a snitch because, they're saying something disruptive or whatever. And it doesn't matter, like, because none of your actions really have long-term consequences online. Um, so I guess that's all I have to say about that, and I don't want to run my mouth on things that I'm really not that qualified to speak of, other than in the most kind of um, abstract and kind of like uh, uh, catechismic ways of just kind of like, well, as a general principle, you should not snitch jacket people. Like, I think that's honestly kind of the best that I can do in this context with regards to that question. Eve, I'm reading a lot of books. I'm reading a book and this may be repeating for folks who have been with us since the beginning. I'm reading a couple books. I'm reading Marx on Capitalism by James Ferner. I'm reading The Accumulation of Capital by Rosa Luxemburg. I'm rereading Capital by Marx. I'm reading the latest issue of the Socialist Magazine Monthly Review. I am reading a biography of Alexander Bogdanov, and I'm reading a couple other books. I don't want to list them all off, but yeah. Let's see. Anthony Ruiz says, how about a more casual question? What do I like to do for fun? Any hobbies besides reading? I was gonna say, I think it's the only thing I do. No, I'm kidding. I play a lot of video games. Not very like, not like, I wouldn't call myself like a gamer really. But there's games that I play that I think are a lot of fun. I like Pokemon. I've been playing the shit out of the latest Fire Emblem game for the Nintendo Switch, Three Houses, which is an absolutely monumental game. I would recommend it to anybody. Has actually some pretty interesting like class commentary, despite kind of being a textbook fantasy JRPG fantasy game. It's got some really interesting um, discussion of class and that sort of thing in it. It's not and it, to be it's not terribly deep, but it's more than you usually see out of a big mainstream title like that. So pretty casual gamer, I guess. That's one thing I do for fun. I'm also kind of I draw. I'm kind of just a casual artist. Sometimes publish the things that I draw online. Uh, what else? I really like karaoke. Karaoke's a lot of fun. Um, I've been a little bit insecure about doing it since transitioning and like not being super at home with my voice anymore. But like, I still try to get out there and make it happen. So yeah, I hope that there's a couple things I do for fun. Um, Vegan Egoist says, do you recommend reading Marx, his older works like Grundrisse and so on before reading Capital? No, I do not. In fact, I think there's a very careful approach that you need to take to Marx when you're reading his older stuff because, like any human being, he changed quite a bit over his lifetime. He went, his earlier works are much more like fiery and flowery and you can kind of hear more uh, the Hegelian Marx is a lot more prominent in his younger works, like the stuff that he wrote in the 1840s. So Marx was born in 1818, I believe, and died in 1883. And his most quote unquote mature works were like after 1858 or so. So like the Grundrisse and Capital and whatnot. Capital Volume One is like the most complete of his works, and it's the most that's like you know of his big works at least. So yeah, I would in terms of like, and I think it's also like we need to get away from this like idea of like, oh, just read Marx. Like, okay, no, that's not very helpful. Like, read what Marx, Capital, and we should, Capital is not a leftist Bible. It's a description of how capitalism works. That's all it is. And it's a very good one. It's one that I think leftists will do very well to read. But not everyone needs to do it. It's a very difficult thing to read. I struggle with it still, and I've read it several times. That's why I keep going back to it. It's a very interesting, it's a very insightful book. But yeah, no, I would not advise unless you are like really trying to just nerd out on Marx and just be know every little last turn over every leaf. I would not say to read the Grundrisse or the other, Marx's older works. I'm not saying like don't read them. I'm just saying I don't think you need to read them before you read Capital. I would just, if you want to read Capital, go ahead and pick yourself up a copy of Capital. Get yourself a little highlighter or a underliner or whatever it is you use to study, and like really go through it meticulously. I would highly recommend David Harvey's companion to Capital because he really helps put things in much more accessible terms. Do do do. Victor says, yeah, Grundrisse can be really screwy. Yeah. Grundrisse is that I believe translates roughly to like groundwork, like an outline, basically. It's very, other Marxist scholars have referred to it as Marx's laboratory. Like it's very, it's not, it's was published from like his notebooks and stuff. It was not something that he like published as an independent work. It was something that people who are documenting Marx's unfinished works put together into a single volume. So it's still interesting to read. It's still a very, it's kind of like if you want to understand the transition from, young Marx to mature Marx. It's you can see a lot of it's the last kind of vestiges of his old Hegelianisms in there, and kind of the beginnings of his more concrete study of economics and whatnot. Let's see. I hope vegan egoist. I hope that answers your question. Alex says, "Do you do any organizing?" Yes, I am a member of the Portland chapter of Democratic Socialists of America, and I'm very proud of the work that we do. I am specifically the work that I do is I'm part of the political education working group, and we help bring the chapter up to speed on good books to read and good that sort of thing. Good historical and theoretical knowledge. It's an essential part of any socialist organizing. So, without going any, without saying anything self-incriminating, that's the activism that I do. So that's all. That's what I'll say about that. Uh, Javi says, "I hope you're past the spindles. Capital is way too academic for my taste." Yeah, Capital is not an easy book to read, and frankly, if you're not in the right space for it, it can send you off to sleep. It's not for everyone, and I think so. I want to kind of there's a question that nobody really answered so far, or nobody really asked so far, but I feel like it's implicit in a lot of what people say, like, oh, what Marx should I read first, or what Lenin should I read first, or whatever, is when this is what I really have a distaste for, when there's this kind of just general admonition to go read theory, um like not everyone, for one thing, not everyone can read theory because of things like reading disabilities and other intellectual disabilities or intellectual challenges. Not everybody can read theory because they have a job and kids and they have to work and stuff. So read theory is a collective admonition. Like, we need some people who can read some kinds of theory, some people who can read other kinds of theory, and through the practice of coming together in organization, we can collectivize that responsibility. We can share that responsibility. Being well read in theory is, for me, is not about being the best, the smartest person in the room. That's a very capitalist way to think, in my opinion. Being well versed in theory is being able to share and transmit that knowledge to your comrades so that you can share a common language and struggle together. The point is not to know, oh, what did Marx think about the circulation of capital and blah blah blah. Those are good things for people to talk about, sure, but that's not the point of reading theory, in my opinion. It's to have better informed organizing, and it's not something that we should be individualizing. It's something. It's a collect again. I'll emphasize this over and over again. Reading theory is a collective responsibility. It is something that we do together, and not everybody needs to read Capital and Lenin and all the rest. This is again a collective responsibility. We're in this together. Let's read for each other, with each other, etc. We have comrades that have dyslexia or other things like that, so we should be producing audiobooks for them. And people who can only, maybe they can only read Lenin if it means they can listen to an audiobook of imperialism on their way to work in the car or whatever. So we need to be accommodating for things like that, and we need to be doing that work. And that's what I think. So I have a lot of admiration for leftist YouTube content creators and podcasters and that kind of thing. Um, because that's what that work is. It's very kind of preliminary. I have a great respect for folks like Radical Reviewer, who was here earlier, and Revolutionary Left Radio and their side project, Red Menace. there's plenty of other great ones that are good for understanding heavy books like Marx Madness. They're a really good podcast. There's also Proles of the Round Table, which is a little bit more history oriented. But yeah, that's just, I think that's probably what I'll say about that, and get back to your questions here. Ba, 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 ba. Rolando says, as a father, caretaker, and part of the workforce, I've been finding it difficult to get involved in DSA. Are there any ways of taking part in forwarding leftist ideas at home? Yeah. So, like, I think this ties into the little mini ramble I just went on, which is, like, especially for our comrades who are, parents and uh, working people. Like we are, like, I work a lot and I can only come on and do this DSA stuff and this YouTube channel. This is what I do with my limited spare time. So I 100% empathize with the need to make participating in mass leftist politics more accessible. And so, I don't have my time nearly constrained as someone who's maybe, a parent, but yeah, I'd say that it's on us as the folks who have that extra spare time here and there to reach out to our comrades who are constrained by their other life necessities under capitalism, and to, like, I'll give for an example, Rolando. Uh, we do daycare and stuff so that folks who have kids can still come to meetings and have their kids taken care of while they're at the meetings. And I think that uh, I've heard from folks not just in DSA. I've heard folks from other organizations who have done stuff like that, where you have like a rotating uh, duty of childcare, so that folks with kids can still participate. But Rolando, I hope that answers your question a little bit. I'm sorry, I don't have I don't have great answers for everything, but I hope that helps a little bit. Sorry if it's not enough of an answer. I am going to wrap up pretty soon here, folks. So get those questions in, and I'll do my best to kind of put a put a bow on things here, and send y'all on your way. um, uh, do. Just looking, trying to make sure I didn't miss any big questions. Hobbies. Yeah, the ASMR video. I saw that show up in my YouTube notifications. I've been meaning to listen to it. I hope I think I might be able to do that today at some point. By the way, welcome Javi and everyone who hasn't heard of their channel. Go and subscribe. Cuñado de Izquierdas. Go subscribe to their channel. They do a bunch of fun lefty stuff, and I've been on their stream I think once or twice. I think it probably just once. Anyway, they do great stuff. Make sure to go check them out. So I guess unless the folks have more questions, I'm just gonna wrap things up here. So uh, maybe just wait another minute or two and see if folks have more questions. And if not, I will bid you good night. So the 10 folks who are watching now, please Eve says, I learned Russian to read historical documents. Yeah, well, it's not quite true that I learned Russian to read historical documents. I actually, I grew up speaking Russian, but I didn't learn how to read or write until college. So for me, it was more of a process of formalizing my existing knowledge. Uh, my Russian now is неплохо. It's not bad. I can halfway hold a conversation, and I can read, but so thank you, folks who are yeah. I hope I might do something a little bit more prepared next time. This was pretty improvised. Hope that folks got their questions answered. Uh, Rolando says, can gardening be considered a leftist activity? Yeah, absolutely. It's a good way to create things that are outside of the commodity system, right? Like commodity production is the right a commodity. If we take a commodity to be things that are produced by to be exchanged to make a profit, then gardening can be very anti-capitalist in that regard. Just maybe on an individual level, even if it's a small thing, right? It's not going to be bring about the revolution in and of itself, right? But it's certainly it's creating things that don't have a monetary value attached to them. Um, Oh, right. So I'm going to drop my Twitter in the chat for folks who haven't uh, followed me on Twitter yet. So there's my Twitter. I'm going to drop my Patreon in case folks want to contribute even just a little bit. I also have Venmo if you can only just send me a one-time transaction. I put a lot of work into this, and I don't. I don't do it because I'm making buckets of money off of it. I do it because I believe in spreading leftist education. So, I really appreciate folks who want to help support that. So, yeah, Eve, same is true of my Spanish. Folks, my Spanish was I grew I my had family who worked in immigration resettlement services, so I grew up speaking mostly Russian, Spanish, and so similarly, like my Spanish is I wouldn't say it's great, but it's I can halfway hold a conversation and I can read quite a bit in Spanish, but I would not go as far. I feel like it maybe be a little bit too bold to call myself fluent. I have decent pronunciation and I can uh, more or less hold conversation. But I want to try to be humble with that there because I think I would be a bit out of place if I was to just try to enter into a a conversation among native Spanish speakers. I think I would be very I think I'd be understanding quite a bit, but I'd be very behind. Anyway, so I'm calling it a night. Oh, gracias, Javi. I do my best. uh, well, all right. So, good night, folks. It's time for me to log off. Have a good evening. Solidarity forever.